Hey there, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. There have been some lingering concerns that BEAD funding could be allocated to places that already have committed funds from RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, especially for fixed wireless. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. Hey there, thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Zcorum. So this is something that people have been worried about, with all of the money that was being allocated through RDOF, and then we've got BEAD that's following behind that. Plus, we've got funds through ARPA that are being released now for various projects. A lot of people are concerned, they want to make sure that we don't use all of this money that's being put out there to overbuild, so that if we are providing funds from one program to improve broadband there, that we don't then suddenly overbuild that area, wasting those funds. Because really the goal is to be able to ensure that every location in the United States that can get broadband can get access to good quality, reliable broadband. And certainly we want to try to make that affordable as well. And what we don't want to do is waste some of that money by overbuilding an area that already has broadband. Let's say reliable broadband, good quality broadband. Now there are some questions as to what's reliable, what's quality, whether there should be competitors in the area. But certainly, first thing we need to do, and this is what the NTIA said, is that make sure that everybody that's unserved and even underserved, anything let's say under 100 by 20, would preferably get access to broadband before any funds from any federal money would be used to overbuild an area that already has that. So there have been concerns in general. But I saw this article, and it's bringing up a specific situation where it could be a case where it could happen because you've got a different definition of what reliable broadband is in two different programs. In one program, you don't really have a definition, so to speak, and in the other, you do. So we can take a look at that today. So you see here, will BEAD fund RDOF overbuilds? It's complicated. So BEAD is the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. That's out of the Infrastructure Act. That's the $42.45 billion that we're all waiting to hear where that's going to go, dependent on unserved locations and the FCC map and all of that. RDOF was way prior to that. That's the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. That was before the pandemic. That was before ARPA. So that was the reverse auction that the FCC did of funding coming from the USF fund, from USAC. That's the little, not so little anymore, but the fee that you have on your bill. If you get phone service, there's a fee on there, the USF fund, and that's going to pay for these RDOF things. Well, we don't want to, even though it's not tax money, we still don't want to double dip here on funding. So I was going to read through this and then look at a couple of other things. And as always, by the way, if you have any comments as you're watching this, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll pull those up and read those and look through those. Or if you've got a comment afterward, after this is over, if you're watching the recording, go ahead and drop that in the comments section of YouTube. Lingering concerns about whether money from the $42.5 billion BEAD program will be used to fund overbills of other government subsidized projects flared up again at this week's BEAD Success Summit in Washington, D.C. Word from the show floor indicated that concerns seem to center around what BEAD will mean for those receiving funding from RDOF. So what do federal officials have to say about it all? BEAD is being administered by the NTIA, which expects to announce how much each state will get from the program by June 30th, 2023. So what they're doing now is the FCC is finishing up their calculations on the broadband fabric that is listing where all serviceable locations are in the country. And then ISPs have uploaded their latest information on which of those locations they serve. And that's going to be the next FCC map that comes out sometime, let's say May, June. And that's going to determine how many unserved locations we have in the United States, and then how many unserved locations each state has compared to all of those total locations. And that's going to determine what the NTI decides how much of that $42.45 billion each state is going to get. Each state's going to get their minimum allocation of $100 million, and then they will get some amount over that based on their percentage of unserved locations. So that's what we're waiting on. NTI Chief Alan Davidson had says previously that there will be some sort of screening process to avoid funding going toward overbuilding. So certainly they want to look at that. It should be easy to find out, which areas are getting, certainly through, let's say, ARPA, because that's all being funded through the states, and then same thing with BEAD being funded through the states. So the federal government sending money to the states who are then sending it to those locations. So both the state and the federal government know where that money's going and who it's going to be helping out. So certainly ARPA funds. RDOF's a little different, and that's going directly, that kind of bypassed the state. That's going directly from the FCC to the service provider that said they would provide the service there. That was through that reverse auction, and they get a certain level of support based on what they bid. So they pay for part of it, and then there's a certain amount of support that they get on that. So that's a little bit different there, but certainly all of that's information, public information on who got the money, and it's going to be known, certainly through the FCC, where those projects are. But that's not really what the rub is here. So as we look at this, where was I? Sorry. Right here. So asked for clarification. NTI spokesperson told Fierce this week that the rules for the BEAD program specify that locations may not be counted as unserved or underserved if they're subject to an enforceable federal, state, or local commitment to deploy qualifying broadband, and that would be RDOF. When it comes to RDOF, specifically, locations would be considered as having an enforceable commitment if the FCC has authorized funding to cover them. And I think the FCC is probably done with that for now. I'd be surprised if they authorized anything else prior to any BEAD money going out. They have worked through the list. I don't know who's left. They eliminated a few, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then they've authorized a whole bunch of money. So I don't know if they're going to kind of hold back and what they're going to do on that. But as I said, that was prior to ARPA coming out, the American Rescue Plan Act, which has got a lot of coronavirus funding, and a lot of that's going toward broadband. And it was certainly prior to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the BEAD program from that. So all of that was prior. So I don't think they're going to fund anything else. And again, we'll talk about RDOF and who got money or who the top folks are here in just a minute. But there seems to be a catch or two. It appears that a location can be considered unserved or underserved if the provider relies on satellite technology. And it says that shouldn't be too much of a problem given the FCC rejected the $885 million in winning RDOF bids from the largest satellite participant, SpaceX. And I don't think there was another satellite. At least if there was, I don't think they've been awarded anything. So they may be holding their fire on that one as well. If there were a few other like Viasat or somebody like that had also bid. But certainly SpaceX, I don't remember any satellite operator getting something that was approved to be awarded on RDOF. And certainly SpaceX, they were one of the top winners, and the FCC said, no, we're not going to do it. So the FCC is not going to approve SpaceX. SpaceX did appeal that, but I haven't heard anything as far as the appeal goes. It seems certain fixed wireless access deployments could also be vulnerable, and here's where it gets tricky. The NTIA spokesperson noted BEAD rules are designed to ensure that there's no overlap between BEAD and RDOF, where the RDOF award is for a qualifying, reliable broadband service, but that's the question. However, BEAD rules notably do not consider unlicensed fixed wireless access services as reliable broadband. NTIA officials previously had told Fierce that's because systems using unlicensed spectrum do not, by definition, have guaranteed access to the transmission medium they use to provide service, and thus could be vulnerable to interference. So there's nothing in RDOF that said, if you were getting RDOF money, there's nothing that said you had to use licensed or unlicensed spectrum. So somebody who got this RDOF money and they're a fixed wireless access operator could use unlicensed spectrum. But according to the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity, unlicensed spectrum, entirely unlicensed spectrum, is not considered reliable broadband. In fact, let's take a look at that real quick. So this is from the BEAD NOFO, specifically this top part is from page 15, and you see here where this is in the definition section where it's talking about what is reliable broadband service. The term reliable broadband service means broadband service that the broadband data maps, and that would be the FCC maps that are out now. The pre-production draft is out, and as I mentioned, the first production version will be coming out in May, so that the broadband data map show is accessible to a location via either fiber optic technology, cable modem, hybrid coax technology, basically just cable modem service. And surprisingly, digital subscriber line technology is part of that, and then or terrestrial fixed wireless technology, utilizing entirely licensed spectrum or using a hybrid of licensed and unlicensed spectrum. So fixed wireless is okay and considered reliable broadband if it's either all licensed or a hybrid of both licensed and unlicensed. And I don't know, I'm assuming that means in a specific area, it's licensed and unlicensed in each area that is going to be covering. Then you see here, this is from page 28, and this is talking, you see here, this is the section program fund allocation and notice of available amounts, and then specifically criteria for reliable broadband service. For the purposes of the BEAD program, locations served exclusively by satellite services using entirely, or satellite, services using entirely unlicensed spectrum or a technology not specified by the Commission for purposes of the broadband data maps do not meet the criteria for reliable broadband service, and so will be considered unserved. So what this is saying is, if there's an area out there, let's say an area gets funded by RDOF and it's all unlicensed spectrum, then that's not considered reliable broadband service and thus would be considered unserved. So based on this NOFO, that area could be eligible for additional funds from BEAD coming in there because it's considered unserved, even though we had just funded it through RDOF and it's fixed wireless, and it could be good service. I mean, it could be providing close to a gig service, fixed wireless. If it's, let's say, unlicensed CBRS spectrum, mid-band spectrum, it certainly could be providing fast service. But because it's unlicensed, it's unserved. So that is where this question comes up. And that's what they're saying here. It's certain that there is some of that. It's not entirely clear how many RDOF locations are set to be served using unlicensed fixed wireless access. Two big RDOF winners who were planning to use fixed wireless, LTT Broadband and Starry, either had their bids rejected by the FCC or abandoned their commitments, but the FCC authorized other winning bids from fixed wireless access providers, including Nextlink, Internet, and Resound Networks, as well as Gigabeam Networks and Anthem Broadband. And I was actually going to pull this up. So this is from 2020, but this is the list of winners at that time of the RDOF auction. And these were the top 10. So you can see there were some changes since then that mentioned here. LTD Broadband, they were told by the FCC, we're just rejecting everything because they had all kinds of problems with their applications, especially related to getting authorized to provide VoIP service by certain public commissions, state commissions. So the FCC finally just said, we're just not going to accept any of your bids. So they were out. And then we had SpaceX, as mentioned. The FCC decided, even though they were top 4 in this list, so we got top 1 and top 4 now who have not, are not getting money. So there's still a lot of money that's available in RDOF just from these two dropping out. And then we had Starry, it mentioned, they were down here. Starry also, they dropped out on their own because they were having some financial issues. So they said, hey, we can't afford to do this even though we want it. So they were announced to be ready to be authorized by the FCC, and they decided not to do it. So they basically defaulted on their bids. So you have those 3 that dropped out of the top 10. Then down here, you've got Nextlink. They were authorized by the FCC, and they were going to be doing fixed wireless. Then you've got Resound Networks, the same thing. They were authorized, and they were planning on doing, it says fiber and fixed wireless. So I don't know if that means fiber backhaul with fixed wireless, kind of last mile or to the end user kind of service. But between those two, if you look at them, they are now 4th and 6th on this list, having 2 of them above them drop out. And between the 2 of them, that's $740 million of funding and over 425,000 locations that they would be covering with fixed wireless, that if they do it with unlicensed spectrum or some portion of that, let's say certain areas with unlicensed, then those could be overbuilt by BEAD funding, because these RDOF ones, it doesn't matter whether they're licensed or fixed, licensed wireless or unlicensed. And certainly it's less expensive for them, as these guys were in there bidding for RDOF, and they were maybe figuring out, okay, how low can we go on this? This was a reverse auction, so they're probably deciding how little money can we take from the federal government and still do this and make a profit. They might have been looking at unlicensed spectrum. So I don't know. And again, this Fierce article says they don't know as either, but that is a question there. Let's see. Asked what percentage of RDOF locations might be eligible for BEAD funding, the NTIA spokesperson told Fierce, we don't have figures on this, but any overlap between the programs is minimal. Well, I don't know how they know that if there are no, if they don't know, how do they know? So how do they know it will be minimal? Because again, that's a lot of locations. What I say, 425,000, over 425,000 locations that could potentially be impacted by that. Spokesperson added, more information will be forthcoming in guidance regarding the BEAD challenge process we intend to release in the near future. So maybe they will take this into account somehow as they provide more information. The Wireless Internet Service Providers Association previously warned that the current BEAD rules could lead to as much as $8.6 billion in waste because they would allow funding to go toward overbuilds of areas already covered by fixed wireless access. WISPA's analysis wasn't specific to the RDOF program, though. Then we've got this article. I just wanted to mention this at the same time because this is a concern, because even with licensed spectrum, let's say it's licensed 5G spectrum that somebody like a T-Mobile might be using, or Verizon or AT&T, could be CBR spectrum. It could be what else is there? C-band spectrum. Some of those that are licensed, that mid-band spectrum. Fixed wireless access could run out of capacity by 2027. So this is a concern. Report prepped for wireless industry lobbying org CTIA suggests bleak future for home internet services relying on excess 5G network wherewithal. And one of the things that is a concern, this is not so much from a WISP that's doing fixed wireless and that's all they do. This concern is more from, they have to have access to spectrum as well, but they're concerned by folks like T-Mobile and others that mobile is their main bread and butter, and they're adding fixed wireless home internet on top of that. And they don't want to threaten that mobile business because that's where they get a lot of their money. So they're doing 5G service via mobile, and then they're doing 5G via fixed wireless. And in some cases, they may not have enough spectrum to do both, right? So mentions here a new report compiled by the Brattle Group on behalf of the wireless industry's big trade group of the Cellular Telephone Industry Association suggests U.S. wireless operators will run out of 5G capacity by 2027. Mentions Light Reading first picked up the report. Absent any new spectrum in 5 years, by 2027, the U.S. is expected to have a spectrum deficit of nearly 400 megahertz, the report says. Fixed wireless access would likely be the first service to be impacted. Already today, home broadband over 5G is only offered in locations where operators have available capacity in the network to provide sufficient quality of service for a home connection, the report adds. And that's true. T-Mobile is only taking orders where they have excess capacity. In the Atlanta area here, they have it the last time I checked, but they do say there when you go to see if you can get it, it says, hey, limited time, we can only take a limited number of customers, basically. So that right there tells you if they are going to provide service to an area that is unserved, would that be a threat in the future that they won't be able to take customers because they've run out of spectrum? So any funding from BEAD, for example, even with licensed spectrum, could be an issue if that provider can't get enough spectrum later to be able to serve the customers that want it. Earlier this month, equity research company MoffettNathanson published its own report, which illustrated how T-Mobile's fixed wireless service has largely been confined to parts of markets that have extra network capacity. So that could be unserved areas, could be served areas like here in Atlanta. But again, as they get a certain number of customers, then they don't want to take any more. And AT&T has been slow to roll this out, any 5G service, because they don't have as much spectrum as T-Mobile. Verizon has started, maybe it's AT&T that started focusing on it more because I think fiber deployments have been down. So I linked to this article. I linked to both articles in the description here. And also I linked to the Light Reading article that's referenced in this one because it's got a little bit more information if you want to check that out. So I appreciate that. And I see here, looks like they had to leave, but looks like penny pinch your coins. Hello, unlicensed spectrum is hogtied. I have to leave, but I'll watch the stream later and get back home. Okay, so I'm not sure what they mean by unlicensed spectrum is hogtied, but certainly unlicensed can work. CBR spectrum, they have a license sharing mechanism in place where you can have an incumbent in there, and you can have this dynamic kind of thing where the spectrum can be shared between a licensed person. So you can get licensed spectrum in CBRS, but there's also a block of unlicensed spectrum. And the licensed spectrum gets priority, and then the unlicensed spectrum can use what's left. So there is that spectrum sharing. So it works pretty well, but there is a concern that I guess with BEAD funding, whether or not that would be something that would be considered reliable if it's not licensed. But again, even licensed spectrum, there's a question as to how much 5G spectrum is out there and whether there will be enough spectrum to take orders from whoever might want it in that area. So if the only fast broadband service you have in an area is 5G, other than, let's say, something like you could always get satellite wherever you are pretty much. But let's say as far as that kind of service, you don't have a good wired service, so you don't have good DSL service, don't have good cable modem service or fiber service. If the only thing you can get is fixed wireless and it's 5G, the question is, could that provider take orders from anybody who wants it? Or will they run into a situation where they don't have enough spectrum? So that's a concern there. And then you do have this thing of whether or not we'll be able to overbuild, or we'll be overbuilding areas that have fixed wireless that's unlicensed, because that's not considered reliable broadband. So these are things that are going to have to be worked out. And maybe, as it mentioned, there will be some guidance, further guidance or future guidance from the NTIA as we get closer to the point where they're going to be allocating these funds. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. If you're not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when I'm live. If this was helpful or interesting, if you could be a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. I appreciate you joining me today, and I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.